Hi everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on wherever you are. Welcome to this info session by Adrianople Group. We're glad to have the Director of Research here with us in the person of Thibault, who will be guiding us through a series of presentations about what they do and talent that they are sticking out for, even in CMU. Just a few tips on how we're going to be running this session. So in a couple of minutes time, Thibault is going to take over and run us through the session. And then we are welcome to ask questions. So you could either drop your questions on the chat, I'll take it off from there, or you could use the raise hand feature to signal that you have a question or you have a comment. So feel free to do that. Also, while asking a question, I think it's good for you to introduce yourself, maybe your concentration at CMU and other skill sets you have or the things you love to do, just briefly before you ask your question. So right now, I think I would hand over to Thibault to take us in the session.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Courage. Can you guys see my screen?
I can see it.
All right, fantastic. Well, first of all, hello to Carnegie Mellon Kigali. Our team first noticed and took interest in this fantastic university when my colleagues actually visited Carnegie Mellon University in October of 2019 when we were touring the Kigali Free Zone. So before we get into really the nitty-gritty as to what we do as a company, I'm going to tell you a story which explains not just what we're doing, but why we're doing. And this is the story of the death and rebirth of China. So China, at the turn of the 20th century, fought a decades-long brutal civil war that lasted from 1927 to 1949. At the end of this war, a dictator, Mao Zedong, came to power, who really wanted to transform many aspects of society. He launched a project to reform nearly every single imaginable area of culture, of society. He had communist ideals, but really what he wanted was to collectivize many of the resources so that instead of being owned by the individuals, they were to be owned by the state. So many industries, like agriculture, were collectivized. What this meant is that China had a system with many small farmers who each had their own sort of plots of land, who each were doing their own thing on a somewhat limited scale. And all of these small-time farmers were consolidated into these massive, mega industrial-sized farms. And the result was devastating. Economic mismanagement would lead to crisis and famine. One notable example of how this mismanagement occurred was the sparrows. The sparrows were these tiny little birds, and every year the sparrows would come and eat a certain amount of the grain. However, the sparrows were omnivores, meaning that they ate both plants and animals. And the sparrows also ate the locusts. So as a result, massive locust swarms several years later appeared that were even worse than the sparrows. And by trying to improve agricultural productivity by killing the sparrows, they unleashed locust plagues that caused mass famine unlike anything China had seen. In fact, many believe that it was one of the worst famines in human history. This is a picture where you can see that the bottom of these trees have all been scraped. There's no more bark. This picture was taken by an American missionary, and the story he told is that he's going through a forest, and the first thing he notices is that there are no animals in the forest. No squirrels, no birds, no deer. So the American missionary asks his guide, what happened to all the creatures? What happened to all the animals? And the guide explains, the peasants were hungry and ate all of the animals. And as he keeps going, he starts noticing that the bottom of the trunks of trees, as you can see in this picture, had been scraped off. And he asks, what happened to all the trees? Why was the bark scraped off? Well, what had happened is that Farmers who were so desperate to fill their bellies with just any food they could had started scraping off the bark of trees and sort of chewing it to survive the hunger. 50 million people would die in this famine. For a sense of scale, the total death toll of all of World War II is about 80 million. So it's something like 70% of the entire death toll of all of World War II died because of economic mismanagement and famine. However, in 1976, Mao would die, and China would turn a new chapter in its history. Deng Xiaoping, who is perhaps one of the most brilliant men of the 20th century, would come to office in China. And what Deng Xiaoping would do is that he would reform the economy of China using special economic zones in a way that very few countries have ever experienced before. And he would transform China from a country that was riddled by war, by poverty, by famine, by death, into the modern economic superpower that it is today. So the first thing that Deng Xiaoping did is that he visited Singapore and Hong Kong to see where there were other Chinese people who were living, who had the same culture, the same language, but were doing well economically. So here he is on the left, and to the right, the taller guy is Lee Kuan Yew, who was the leader of Singapore at the time. And what he decided to do was create 4 special economic zones right next to Hong Kong, the most famous of which being Shenzhen, in the middle of that circle. And what he did is that he copied the best aspects of the legal systems from Hong Kong and from Singapore to replicate them in his own country of China. In 1984, he created 10 more special economic zones, and he turned the downtown Pudong district of Shanghai into a zone. By 1990, there are more than 200 special economic zones in China. And nowadays, there are 2,500 of these zones in China. China's gross domestic product starts skyrocketing from the moment 1980, when China starts adopting these zones. Why? Because these zones enabled the businesses, foreign businesses, to do business in China. Previously, what it was is that under the communist system, it was illegal to hire somebody else. All the workforce, all of the labor, all of the companies had to be centralized in large, gigantic, sort of state-controlled mega corporations. And now, by allowing foreign investment and by allowing Chinese citizens to operate their own business, China's GDP skyrocketed. Here you can see Shenzhen. On the top is a picture of Shenzhen from 1985. In 1985, Shenzhen was a small fishing village of 65,000. By 2015, Shenzhen was a megacity of 14 million. On the top, you can see Shanghai in the 1980s. Shanghai was already an existing city, but the city was not nearly as built up. On the top is the Pudong district, that green area, was a swampland, worthless land, just sort of watery, wet. Pudong becomes a special economic zone, and on the bottom, you can see the massive skyscrapers and how all of the technological progress is coming from China. Shenzhen now has more billionaires living there than cities, Chinese billionaires living there, than cities such as Hong Kong, London, Paris, Dubai, and even San Francisco, home of the tech industry. Shanghai streets are remarkably clean and pedestrian friendly. When you go there, it's not at all what you imagine China will be like. Shenzhen is now called the Silicon Valley of hardware, and it's notorious for its hardware markets. In fact, here's a video of a guy who actually builds an iPhone from scratch from square parts. And why am I talking about China? Because the story of China is the story of special economic zones. And the story of special economic zones is the one that's just changing the entire world right now. So what are special economic zones? Global poverty since the 1950s is in decline, and it's declining everywhere. In fact, in terms of human well-being and human welfare, the last 50 years have been by far the best in human history. If you look at where economic growth is concentrated, and this data is old, actually Latin America would be a bit more green, but what you find is that economic growth is concentrated in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. The places that are not growing are Europe and America. In fact, depending on what metrics you use, Europe and America may even be regressing and shrinking economically. Special economic zones play a major role in this trend because they're the places that can provide good governance in frontier markets that don't necessarily have good governance already. Here you can see the Suzhou Industrial Park in China. Special economic zones work closely with the governments to improve ease of doing business. They do this by creating one-stop shops, where imagine you need 8 or 9 permits for doing business. You need a building permit, a business permit, an occupational license. Well, the one-stop shops will gather all of these permits into one single place. And in fact, Rwanda has done this extremely well with the Rwanda Development Board, not just one of the best in Africa, but one of the best in the world. And here's a physical one that you can picture, but most, of course, are nowadays online. SEZs do this by improving labor laws. The problems vary immensely. In some countries, like in China in the 1980s, it was illegal for foreign companies to hire Chinese people because they thought that all hiring of somebody else was exploitation. So in the case of China, they made it so that foreign companies could hire local people. In other countries, in places like Chile, foreign companies have to hire a certain amount of local people, and that is also problematic because if you have, a factory or something that makes sense, but if you're a satellite company where there's only maybe 40 or 50 people in the whole world and you want to do business in Chile, the chances that you'll be able to find those 40 or 50 people in the planet who are in that country, not suitable. So by modifying labor laws, you can either hire local people or bring in foreign workers, depending on the country. They provide legal certainty. Here you can see a picture of a court proceeding prior to COVID in Hong Kong that was already done remotely via software like Zoom. Why Singapore? Because Singapore has the world's fairest legal system. It's a small country between Malaysia and Indonesia, and it has the world's fairest legal system. And what many special economic zones have done is that they've outsourced their legal systems to third-party countries that are more trustworthy, are more credible, are more reputable than their own countries. Dubai did this and had great success doing this. Another thing zones provide are tax incentives. Tax incentives are not the most important thing zones do, but they're very important nevertheless, because as long as your taxes are higher than other competing areas that are competing for businesses, then you're going to lose. So as long as your taxes are roughly the same or lower, then you're in a good position. And the last thing special economic zones do is provide infrastructure. If you're going to be doing business, you need top-class electrical infrastructure, top-class water, you need very fast internet, you need security, you need access to shipping, logistics, railroad, etc. So zones combine the infrastructure and the good governance, and that really creates the environment that's good for business. So what is a special economic zone? It's a geographically limited area where the government offers regulatory and fiscal incentives to companies located there for the purpose of stimulating economic growth. So they take many shapes and sizes. Here you can see an office park in Honduras. You can see an energy zone in Iran, which is mostly for power generation and power-intensive industries like metal refining. You can see a port, such as the Gwadar Free Port in Pakistan, and many logistics hubs are special economic zones. You can even see tourism zones, and this is, I have to say, the most fun zone that I've been to, which is actually a giant water park in Dubai. And you also have charter cities, cities that have millions of people. Gurugram in India is an entirely privately developed city that is actually made up of 6 small zones that are run by competing real estate companies where all the municipal services are private. 9 million people live there, and it's now the head of some of the largest companies in the world, Microsoft, Oracle, McKinsey & Company, etc. This is the world's first map of every single special economic zone in the world, which is a map we've made and we'll discuss a little bit later. And there's 6,500 special economic zones worldwide spread across 70 countries. The world's largest ports, airports, and train stations are almost all special economic zones. Roughly 60% of all manufactured goods in the world, according to the World Bank, are made in SEZs. 1/3 of all new special economic zone projects have started since 2015, making this one of the world's great growth industries. Special economic zone research on success rates indicate that roughly 35% of special economic zones worldwide are profitable, which is quite high. Also, more World Bank research finds that privately managed, privately funded, and privately owned special economic zones are more profitable, more successful, and less corrupt. And what you actually find is that 31% of special economic zones are fully private, and another 32% are public-private partnerships, which is a private company that has some government ownership. So here's some success stories, one that you'll be very familiar with, which is located in Kigali, Rwanda. The park, of course, opened in 2011, as all of you know. And this presentation I made for not a Rwandan audience, but it's a great zone. It's famous for the Volkswagen self-driving car factory and for Mara phones. Home, obviously, to CMU, which is why I'm talking to you right now. And all 97 plots as of this year are full. Another interesting example is the Cayman Enterprise City, almost exactly on the other side of the globe. Opened in 2012 around the same time, very different zone. That one is famous for being home to its cryptocurrency regulatory sandbox and for being the world's top-rated jurisdiction. Cayman Islands is the top-rated country. This is the top-rated place within Cayman Islands. Like the same way that Rwanda Kigali Free Zone is home to CMU, this one is actually home to University of the Cayman Islands. Most really good SEZs are home to universities. There are 250 tenants, including a lot of big law firms, a lot of big cryptocurrency companies, including TikTok, Denton's, Brave. There's the Dubai Internet City, probably one of the most interesting SEZs of all time. Located in Dubai, it opened in 1999, and it's famous for being the headquarters of all of the world's largest tech companies in the Middle East. Like all the good SEZs, once again, it has a university. It's actually across the street from American University in Dubai. There are 1,600 tenants there, and notable tenants include Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM. So the world's largest SEZs have all been announced since 2015, with deal sizes rapidly increasing. In Antigua, there's a $15 billion planned Chinese special economic zone, but it is dwarfed by TRX City, which is a $40 billion project being built around the new Malaysian Stock Exchange, which is itself dwarfed by the King Abdullah Economic City, which is a $100 billion project in Saudi Arabia. And that is itself dwarfed by a $500 billion project funded by PIF, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, in the north of the country. So what is the Adrianople Group? Who are we? Well, simply put, the Adrianople Group is the world's only business intelligence firm focused exclusively on special economic zones. We offer a wide variety of services. Most of our clients are in the private equity and SE and VC industries, so we do due diligence on projects that they want to invest in. We do mapping, as you saw with that map earlier. We can make very detailed maps of supply chain infrastructure. We do zone-specific IT services. We have a whole range of services, ranging from cybersecurity to logistics management software. We do marketing, public relations. We talk to the press. We organize conferences. So it's really a very wide scope. And we've actually done in-country field research in over 54 different countries around the world. So here you can see our team visiting Kigali in 2019. And here I am in Armenia. I'm the guy on the bottom left holding the microphone, giving a presentation to government officials and businessmen about developing SEZs in Armenia. Here's our team visiting the RSTP, Royal Science and Technology Park in Eswatini. Here are some researchers that are speaking at a conference in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. Another one attending, we attend a lot of these conferences, the Central and Eastern Europe Summit on China Issues in Dubrovnik, Croatia. Here I am at a mining and oil conference in Dubai, and it's very funny because they have those portraits of the kings who did a great job. They're the ones who really built up Dubai, but they have these portraits all over the place. Here's a visit of the Limassol Free Trade Zone in Cyprus, a Mediterranean island. And here our team is leading a delegation on behalf of an American investment firm to meet with the Brazilian government to develop new cities. So we've been all over the world, from Hanover to Hong Kong. And we also have the world's first map of every single SEZ on Earth, which we'll be publishing. It will be open source. Anyone will be able to browse it, download it, zoom in, zoom out, click on every dot. It's coming out on June 1st. We work with a wide variety of economic data. This is actually a screenshot from one of our reports that we published. And we also produce all sorts of media, podcasts, blog posts, reports, journal articles. We're filming a documentary right now, filming a documentary in Honduras. So here's some of our clients. One of our clients is Pronomos, which is a venture capital fund funded by some of the most prominent tech investors in the Silicon Valley. What they're looking for are the most innovative next generation special economic zones. Think, Kigali Free Zone actually would qualify. We've been trying to get them to invest. But there are others that might also work. This is the Cortex Financial Services Group, which is a firm that invests in a number of projects, including smart cities around the world. But we also work with a number of NGOs and nonprofits. This is our client, the Charter Cities Institute. And by the way, all of these websites that you've seen, we built in-house for our clients. The Charter Cities Institute is a nonprofit that studies new cities. So this is the Adrianople Group, and now you have a pretty good idea of why we do it, sort of what our industry is and what services we offer and what clients we have. So I'll open up the floor for questions. Thank you very much.